welcome. You're watching the Newshour Agenda. I'm Padmaja Joshi. Over the last 24 hours, India has seen images which will make any Indian's blood boil. A bunch of brainwashed extremists running riot in London, San Francisco, Canberra. Things came to a head when a bunch of Khalistani propagandists pulled down the tricolour flying atop the Indian High Commission in London amid separatist cries. After India summoned the senior-most British diplomat in India and registered its strong protest, one man has now been arrested in London on suspicion of violent disorder. The Metropolitan Police officers also confirmed that they were called about the incident at about 1:50 p.m. on Sunday. In the incident, windows of the Indian High Commission were also smashed and 2 security guards sustained minor injuries. But that's not where these people stopped. Across the world, from San Francisco to Canberra, the action against Amritpal Singh was used as an excuse to target the Indian establishment. In San Francisco, the consulate was damaged after officials frustrated an attempt to try and hoist Khalistani flag atop the building. Some separatist elements then went on a rampage, smashing windows using flagpoles and even a sword. What was even more stunning is that even as India went about its business cracking down on Amritpal and company, some Canadian MPs jumped in to call the suspension of internet and restriction on large gatherings of people as repression of civil liberties. The question, though, is why? Why is the West, why are countries like the United States, like UK, Australia, allowing their soil to be used for such blatant anti-India activity? Why were the Indian High Commission and consulate in UK and US left to fend for themselves? In plain sight, how can Indian assets be compromised like this? And as for Canada, how can the government there defend its MPs trying to portray India's action against secessionist forces as restriction of civil liberties and a crackdown on freedom? Is the West completely oblivious to the Khalistani snakes it's breeding in its own backyard?
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 1 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
All right, joining us now is Terry Milewski, author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project, and Puneet Sahani, expert on the evolution of the Sikh identity. And he has a book coming up on the Khalistan terrorism across the globe. Let me first start by asking you, Mr. Milewski, what do you make of what we've seen in the UK, the US, Canada, Australia? Is this a sudden uptick in Khalistani activity? And if yes, why?
I don't think it is a sudden uptick. I do think that it's important to remember that the MPs who you have rightly quoted as expressing their outrage at these measures and, oh dear, the suspension of the internet, oh, this is a government repression of unprecedented scale. These MPs do not speak for Canada or for the Canadian government. These are not front-rank figures. Tim Upal is close to the leader of the opposition. He's a kind of a right-hand man for the leader of the opposition in Canada. Jagmeet Singh, of course, is more important. He's the leader of the leftist New Democratic Party and a longtime Sikh activist before he became the leader of that party, the NDP. So I hesitate to recommend. I would say that hysteria would be a little early, a little premature, because these people are speaking for themselves and they have endured a shellacking on Twitter as a result. People are jumping on them, say, hey, you've got here a man who led an insurrection, if you like. I mean, he invaded a police station to get one of his own guys out. He travels around with gunmen. He styles himself as a sort of Bindranwale version 2.0, and you object to the government going after him? Are you crazy? So there has been substantial pushback against these MPs expressing their sympathies for the poor persecuted gunmen of Amritpal Singh. You have to also remember that in the West, people had never heard of Amritpal Singh until a couple of months ago. That may be true for many Indians as well, I don't know. But my point is that it's too early, I think, to get hysterical about this, and there is a long record, as you well know, of complaints by Indian governments, including the most recent one and the present one, against Canada in particular for allowing protests in favor of Khalistan. Well, we have freedom of speech, and I think that many of these speeches by Indian politicians berating Canada for its its tolerance of these outrageous statements, these are performative statements by politicians which may impress voters in India, but these politicians know perfectly well that no Western country is going to abolish freedom of speech. Up until the point that these people actually commit crimes of violence, then they're going to be allowed to march down the street with flags and say Khalistan Zindabad. You may not like it, but it's going to happen, and they won't be arrested for it.
Puneet Sahani, is this just a flash in the pan, or there is a real threat? Because let's face it, at the end of the day, it was, what, 50, tops 60 people who catch hold of some Khalistan flags and then go on a rampage.
Right. So, Padmaja, Jai Ma Bharti, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'll just like to say, to fight this Khalistanis, they are so well organized. They may be less in numbers, but they are committed and they are organized. And, the Indian government is I would like to thank, as a Sikh, as a Punjabi, as an Indian, as a human, to people like Mr. Molesky, who have been, fighting this thing for decades. It's only individuals who are taking this menace. So now to your question. So you think if you see Bhindanwala was also like this. He came out of nowhere. And, you will be surprised, like in 1980, he, supported Gurdwara elections. So he didn't run, but his right-hand man, the son of his guru, his name was Amrit Singh. He even lost the Gurdwara election. So the thing is, this ideological committed people, they can spread hatred and division. And then it can take a life of its own and it can cause untold destruction. I'll just like to make a point, because Terry and me, we are old hands at this. He's a real old hand. I have done study by reading people like Terry. So, you are really disturbed by what happened in UK. I'll tell you, in 1980s, this Khalistanis in Canada, not on a holiday that they are doing, on a national festival like a Republic Day or a Independence Day, they will force their way into the Indian consulate and embassy and then desecrate the Indian flag. So they have, and this is what we should do. And another point I would like to make is, we are criticizing UK, it should do this and do that. You see, democracy had its vulnerabilities. They took their daughters, thousands of them, these grooming gangs, Pakistani grooming gangs, and they couldn't do anything because of identity politics. But anyways, I think we should make the case to the British people that these people are very dangerous to their societies, rather than saying that we are outraged and we are hurt. And I'll give you an example. So if you do, there is a name, his name is Rajinder Singh Bhatt. Bhatt spelling is B-A-A-T-H. Right? So if you do it, nobody knows about him, but if you do, you'll find in archives. That guy in 1980s, he killed a person, he killed a preacher. What was the sin of that preacher? The sin of the preacher was preaching peace. That Hindus and Sikhs are one people, we should live with peace, we don't support Khalistan. And you have a judgment in UK, which, really takes this person down. What kind of nonsense is this? You have killed a man for peace for no reason. And that man was in prison for 35 years. And when he was released recently, all these Khalistanis and UK and Canada were celebrating and felicitating that person, that he is some great person. We should actually make the case that these Khalistanis are supporting murderers. And this will go and commit more murders. Then you will have much more traction than say, this person has given a speech or given a tweet. That is my perspective.
Mr. Molesky, fair point about the freedom of speech, but what happened, for example, in London or San Francisco went far beyond that. This was an attack on the Indian state. It was an Indian establishment. Can the governments of the US and UK say that this is free speech and allow this? What explains the ignorance of the police, for example, to what was happening in plain sight?
Well, they can and they do say it's just free speech. and they've got a sorry record. I've been hard on Indian politicians for sounding tough and demanding this and demanding that we in the West shut down freedom of speech, and I think that they know that that's not going to happen. But it's fair also to be very tough on the politicians in the United States, especially in Canada and in the UK, who have sat back and waved and smiled as the Vaisakhi Day floats go by with people who promise to vote for them if they keep their mouths shut when the next float comes by carrying a great big picture of a gun-toting martyr of the Khalistan cause. For example, the Sikhs for Justice, which is running the current referendum campaign, as you know, and which Indians don't know enough about because, of course, they're banned. Their propaganda is banned. You might want to take a look at it, and you should, if you can, legally do it, because they're naming their referendum campaign headquarters after the most atrocious terrorists. I mean, they named their Canada headquarters for the referendum campaign, I'm not making this up, as the Shahid Bhai Talvinder Singh Parmar Voting Center. Now, most people will recognize that name, and certainly in Canada we recognize that name, as the psychopath who blew up Air India Flight 182, the Kanishka, in 1985 and slaughtered 331 people who were completely innocent civilians who had nothing to do with the Khalistan cause. And then, more recently, they had a voting session, a couple of voting sessions in Toronto, actually in Brampton, the sort of world headquarters of Khalistan in Canada, and they named the voting center after another gun-toting mass murderer, Harjinder Paura, who joined up with Avtar Brahma in a terrorist training camp for the Khalistan Liberation Force in Pakistan, and then went on to commit, he was one of those in the Lalru massacre. They slaughtered, 37 Hindu farmers at one go. They pulled them off a bus. Then later that same weekend did it again. I mean, these are the poster boys of the referendum campaign. So your question is on the point. Why does Canada put up with this? Well, if they are going to use the excuse that, well, the Khalistanis are just expressing their right to free speech, we can't stop them. Hold on a minute. What's wrong with the MPs and the politicians exercising their freedom of speech? Their freedom of speech too. Why don't they speak up and say this is an atrocity? We will not come to your parades and smile and wave if you're going to show us martyr pictures of gun-toting assassins as though they are heroes of your cause and models for Sikh youth. That's where India might do well to aim its fire and say, look, this isn't okay. If you're not going to arrest these people and you're going to tell us that, oh, no, they haven't committed a crime, it's okay to say Khalistan Zindabad, well, then why aren't you speaking up and exercising your freedom of speech to say, look, we're not going to have you in our coalitions. We're not going to pander to you for votes. We're going to pursue the votes of the majority of the Sikhs who disagree with you.
And which is why when you say that there has been a shellacking that they got on social media, but there hasn't been any open censure of these MPs by any politician, mainstream politician of note in Canada.
Guilty. You're right. Yeah,
or elsewhere for that matter.
Yeah.
And that is why their motivations need to be brought into question, because while these protests, Puneet Sahani, may be one thing, is the West and the UK in particular deliberately staying blind to a bigger danger of what Khalistanis could do in the UK? Let's not forget that General Brar was stabbed in London 30 years after Operation Blue Star. It happened in the UK. And now you've got these guys running around and people making it seem as if it's a stray incident. Is it really?
So, Padmaja, you're absolutely right. But the thing is, you imagine, Britain has like people from all over the world. Have we explained the case to them? Like this happened a long time ago. Like one general was here and he was attacked. So much happens in Britain. I can make a case in 5 minutes how these people are so dangerous. I give you an example, Bhindranwala everywhere. I basically took Bhindranwala's speech and subtitled it. And in that, Bhindranwala says, if my bus is not released, I'm going to kill 5,000 Hindus in 1 hour. And then we did viral. Now you should ask this is a genocidal maniac. He's using this language. And how can you allow him? Like give you, like, for example, Amritpal. No, these people are tweeting like Sikh preacher has been taught. If you see, I've posted a video. One of my friends translated it. If you see in the video, you can see like he's attacking the police station with weapons. But more than that, he's using Hitlerian language. So Hitler used to say like Jews are disease, they are pests. So you just go to my Twitter profile and you see, and we have subtitled from Punjabi to English. He's calling Hindus, which is 40% of the citizens of Punjab. He says you have no right over it. He's saying they are pests. Now, if you put this to West, this is the guy that you are trying to catch. They will be much more receptive to you, but you don't do anything. And the other point, like Terry is here, the Canada failed to get any conviction for Air India bombing. But what came out in the trial was all these Khalistanis, to every person was a welfare fraudster. And I don't want to go into it. So all these people, for example, who is doing this? Oh, some Randeep Sarai, he had to resign because he had a gambling addiction and he was involved in corruption. Then you see this Jacques Dillon, he had like sexual assault cases and what he did to this woman. So all these people, these are all lunatics and thugs. It just takes, like a Puneet Sahani or, some young people to like dig it out. The state doesn't do anything. It's just like individuals always taking to them. But these people are very organized. And, like what Terry says, the other says, I tell you example of what people did. So you see Canada is like a, spread out country, right? And on the two edges are the Punjabis in highest number. So you take like, for example, you go on the West Coast. So there was a guy like Brahdan, and they wanted to bring this Khalistani, Harjeet Sajjan. They forced this candidature. And you see these Jat Sikhs, Amritdhari, and actually Terry had filed this report. They basically opposed, we don't want Khalistanis. They tried to speak, they used to, Trudeau destroyed their political career. Now you go to the other side, the East Coast, and again a Jat Sikh, his name is Ramesh Sangha. He basically stood up in the parliament and he said, I'm against these Khalistanis and, I'm a Sikh myself, but there's nothing. Nobody came to his defense. India didn't do anything. Again, this liberal government destroyed his career. So that guy used to be a member of parliament. You know how big a member of parliament position is. Now he had to leave politics and he runs a law practice there. So it is not so easy to say we should speak up. In Canada, to speak anything against Khalistanis, and I'm not talking about the average citizen. I'm talking even for a person of member of parliament. It's like a career suicide because these people have infiltrated the system so much.
And which is why it's important to point out that this is just not some fringe lunatics. It's deeply entrenched and some of them are actually wielding political power at this point, and which is why the silence and that...
Padmaja, it's the same. It's the same. The thing is, it's a fringe, but the fringe has infiltrated. It's like the Muslim Brotherhood. And they basically wag the entire system against anybody who tries to speak against them. So they have silenced everybody else.
And wielding far more political power than their numbers should be commanding. Right. And which is why when you speak, Terry, about Global Khalistan Project, in 2023, what is the Global Khalistan Project?
Well, it exists purely as a matter of convenience for the Pakistani government to fulfill its self-assigned mission to make India bleed. They want to make life hard for India. They want to get revenge for the 1971 war, which tore off Bangladesh. They want to get their own back by tearing off a piece of India, by denying India's land access to Kashmir in the process. They have their own. It's nothing to do with they want to be nice to the Sikhs. It's not that they want the Sikhs to be free, and that's why Pakistan has always provided them with a refuge and a safe haven and weapons and training and medical care and you name it. It's not because they love the Sikhs and want them to be free. Look at how they treat their own Sikhs inside Pakistan. Why the population of Sikhs in Pakistan has plummeted over the last couple of decades because of forced conversions and abductions of Sikh girls and the rest of it. The point being that in the Khalistan movement today, they have their narrative, and the Pakistanis have their narrative, and it just so happens that they have a common interest, making India suffer. But the whole idea, I mean, part of the problem is that India has done, I believe, a rather poor job of propaganda in fighting back against Khalistani propaganda by, for example, saying, well, what is it, by exposing what is this Khalistan? Where is it going to be? Oh, I see you've revised the map again. And the map of Khalistan says, I see, so your capital is going to be in Shimla. And you tell us that you're only having the voting for the referendum on Khalistan independence in places where you have a Sikh majority. Well, it's very convenient, but, I've been to Shimla. I didn't notice the Sikh majority. And so why are you including big chunks of Rajasthan? You've got not just Himachal Pradesh, Haryana. You want parts of Uttar Pradesh as well. It's absurd. Secondly, there's no sort of intellectual leadership of the Khalistan movement that puts forward a coherent program for what kind of country this would be. We know that it would be an enemy of India. That's obvious. There's not going to be a friend of India. So where is it going to find friends? How is this state going to survive without an alliance with Pakistan, which, of course, is a client state of China? There's a lot that could be explained if the Indian government to do a diplomatic offensive instead of what it often it does is berate the Canadians or the Germans, or today it's the Australians for tolerating and not silencing these people, which of course can't happen in free speech countries. So there is more work to be done by the Indian government and by the Canadian government, in my case, to push back. And it's not enough to say, crack down, lock them up. It's not that easy when we have the rule of law.
Fair point. When it comes to a battle of narratives, it has to be fought by India. But as far as action against those who decided to attack Indian assets is concerned, now the US and the UK have both been told about it. And finally, of course, when it comes to what the basis of the entire so-called Khalistan movement is, you have enough experts and enough evidence telling you it's a self-serving political Pakistani project, nothing more, nothing less. And in the battle of narratives, I think the most powerful image finally that came yesterday was a massive tricolour that was put after that aborted attempt by the Khalistanis to try and desecrate the tricolour in London. Thanks very much, both gentlemen, for having joined us. Looking forward to reading both of your books very soon.